It's an argument that, to my knowledge, has been going on since the Brixton riots of 1981. It's all about stop and search and how it's used. Now, the relatively new boss of the Met, Sir Mark Rowley, he has said this week, almost unnoticed by any media channel to my astonishment, but he has said that the increased and targeted use of stop and search could reduce attempted murders and murders in London by 50%. And he says that over the course of the last year, murders in London have fallen, particularly amongst youths, quite significantly. Now, that, of course, you never read that in newspapers because you'll never read a good news story. That's impossible. However, a brief look at the numbers shows that the number of black people that are stopped and searched are disproportionately way higher than their population in the capital as a whole. But that is justified, many believe, by the fact that 45% of murder victims in London are black and 61% of those that are found to be guilty are also black. So is this a debate about race, or is this a debate actually about protecting many members of the black community? One thing for certain, stop and search has always been a very contentious issue. Now, the total number of stop and searches now is half what it was in London when the Tories came to power. Theresa May had a lot to do with that. Again, being fearful that she might be seen as Home Secretary to be racist. Our debate tonight, is Mark Rowley right? Let me know your thoughts, farage@gbnews.uk. I personally think anything that makes London a safer place must surely, from a policing perspective, be the right thing to do. But how do you balance that against the accusations that the Met is institutionally racist? It's not an easy one. I'm joined by Peter Bleksley, former Metropolitan Police detective. Peter, you're a veteran. You've been around in all of this. You remember the Brixton riots and the accusations that have come later about institutional racism, etc. Interesting position that Sir Mark Rowley has taken as a relatively new boss of the Met. He's saying this stuff works. Does it in your view?
Undoubtedly. And I really commend Sir Mark Rowley for being courageous enough to tell the truth this week. And you're right, I was there in the dark, filthy, foul, racist days of the late 70s and the early 80s. I was there the weekend, that Brixton burnt. And it burnt because of vile policing that was imposed upon young black men.
So there was guilt?
Oh, undoubtedly. Without a shadow of a doubt. Young black men were fitted up and beaten up. The Met Police has come a long way since then, fortunately, as has society. But because there have been so many sensitivities around the subject, I think some police leaders have been afraid to say quite forcefully the truth. And the truth is, there is no alternative to stop and search. It works. As your accurate stats highlighted earlier in this piece, there is 61% of people who are convicted of knife murders are black men, and 45% of knife murder victims are black. So often, stop and search is used in a tactic in areas with sizable black populations to save lives.
OK. Tracey Miller, author, social worker and former gang member. Hello. This, as I said, all my adult life, this has been a hugely contentious issue. You can't dispute the figures. Way more black people are stopped and searched. But isn't this, in a way, actually to protect members of the black community?
So, naturally, stop and search is to protect everyone, isn't it? That's the whole point. You stop and search, it shouldn't be about colour. There are also, what's it called, stop and account? Does that exist? I'm asking you.
Well, because you can stop somebody, and if there are no grounds to then search them, it's a stop.
And there's no, legally they don't have to answer your questions, they don't have to stay. So are these statistics coming from just stop and search and not being recorded when it comes to stop and account? Because they are two different things. Like, who's recording this data and is it being done correctly, first of all? Yes, young black youths, adults, they do carry knives. I'm not getting away from that. I'm not going to say that they don't. But it's stop and search, in my mind, is suspicion-based power. So is it down to the officer on beat that decides what the suspicion is? Is it coming from higher up? This is what the protocol is and this is who we stop. And that's what my problem is with it.
I have the answer to both those questions, Tracey. Firstly, it can be conducted by an individual officer under his or her initiative because of what they see, what they've heard, intelligence they may have received, or an incident that might have happened recently, for example. A myriad of reasons why an individual officer or a pair of officers might conduct a stop and search. There is also something called a Section 63 order, which can be imposed by a senior officer, whereby there is no need to have any grounds to stop and search. Officers can merely stop and search anybody within a given area when that order is applied. And that order would usually follow an outbreak of gang violence, maybe a murder, where there is a fear that there will be revenge attacks.
And that is proper street policing, isn't it?
Okay, would it be likely, because we're going to look at stereotypes and bias, again, whether it's conscious, unconscious biases at hand, would it be likely that a young black person would be stopped if they were wearing a shirt or a suit with a belt and a tie? Would they be stopped with the suspicion of having a knife or a gun on them?
Well, the truth is they'd be less likely to be stopped if they're wearing a suit. Yes, no, and we understand that, and we get that. But what Peter is talking about, the police using the powers that they have, is in an area that has been subject in the last 48 hours to gun violence. I mean, isn't it reasonable that the police take these measures?
I understand that, and yes, there are people that run around with guns and knives, but there are also not people that do that. So it's like, how do you get to the bottom of who does and who doesn't? I guess it will be via stop and search, but then that's based on the officer and his judgment. And they get it wrong a lot of the time. And if you are in an area where there's Caucasian, white youths, whatever,
what about when they get it right? What about when they get it right and save lives?
Then that's great. But if you're in an area where there's predominantly white youths, then when you stop them, they will have knives on them as well. Is that being recorded? And that's my point. Would that come under the stop and account as opposed to using the stop and search?
They do feature in the stats, and it is a smaller proportion of white young men that get stopped and searched compared to black men. But I would say, no matter who is stopped and searched in the street, and I did thousands of them in my time as a police officer, if you're polite but firm, you often need to be both, and you can be both. You explain your reasons. You, if need be, explain the act and section, the law under which you are carrying it out, and you remain courteous at all times. That goes a long way towards building bridges and not dismantling them. And of course, a stop of somebody in the street does not always have to end up in a search. I'd like to change the term. I'd like the police to call it observe and engage, and then, if need be, follow.
Peter Bleksley, we saw a big reduction in youth murders in London last year. Is it possible that the targeted use of stop and search helped those numbers?
Undoubtedly. 30 teenagers murdered in London in 2020, in 2021, I beg your pardon, 14 in 2022. Of course, 14 tragic.
Still too many, but yes.
Tragic. But that reduction is a good thing in itself, and stop and search was very much a feature.
So I just want to pick up on what you said. It should be done in a well-respected manner, explain to the young person or whoever what's going to happen. So what do you call when it's a stop and search that turns into 3 officers detaining a young person, one's kneeling in his chest, you can hear him visibly, you can hear the audio like, I can't breathe, I need my mum. What do you call that?
Hang on a second. Are you saying that the many members of the black community still regard the Met as the enemy?
Well, when they're going to be doing stop and searches in that kind of manner where it turns into a young person can't breathe and potentially can be hospitalised because he can't breathe, then of course it's going to create animosity.
That would be abuse of police powers against any member of any community.
Of course, but I want to know what you call that, because you explain what stop and search should be, and this is what stop and search looks like now. So can you please...
Before Peter answers that, let me just ask you.
Yeah.
What do you think the Met should try and do to stop the amount of knife crime and murders in London?
Stop everyone then. If it's a stop and search thing that you need to have in place, then stop everyone.
But if you have a borough of London where there have not been any youth murders for the last 5 years, compared to a borough or even a district in London in which there have been several, what would you do?
Stop everyone, because you never know.
I don't buy that, but, OK, I understand. You can see, Peter Bleksley, there is still some residual fear and suspicion of the Met. What else do they have to do? What else does the new commissioner, Mark Rowley, have to do to convince people this is the right course of action?
Neighbourhood policing. Mark Rowley spoke about that again this week, and he's committed to reinventing the wheel in that regard, and I welcome that. Community engagement is important, excuse me, but the communities that need to be engaged with are those who are victims of crime and those who perpetrate crime. If the police do that properly at all times, every community will love seeing their police on the street.
I will draw stumps on this debate. I'll thank you both for taking part of it. And it is, a hugely emotive issue. It has been all my adult life. It will go on being so. Let's just hope this new boss of the Met is more effective in reducing crime than his predecessor.